Cardiff, New Year's Eve 2014. The body of a young woman is discovered in a hotel room at the Future Inn in Cardiff Bay.
Hello, speaking.
There's a woman dead in the room 203.
There's a body in the room.
The body is staged as a suicide, but quickly, police realise there's something far more sinister going on.
Her body had been washed, somewhat bizarrely, and placed in a duvet, in a pose with her hands across her chest, and with a suicide note stating, "I'm sorry it's ended, I still love you." There's no question that this would be a terrible, terrible shock.
This was the murder that had happened in a hotel room, and it came very quickly clear that this was a very serious and quite unusual case.
At the first stages, they didn't know who was responsible for this, and they were obviously still at large at that point.
A large-scale manhunt is launched to find her murderer.
He was giving false locations as to where he was in the world and clearly enjoying the opportunity to just taunt the investigation team.
Her family thought that her killer would never be brought to justice.
This is the story of one of the most shocking hotel murders in Britain, which led to a manhunt across the world.
Just how appalling the crime was and the investigation that went on afterwards was something that I'll never forget.
The Future Inn's hotel is in Cardiff Bay. It's a kind of a mid-range hotel, if you like, probably equivalent to a, Holiday Inn or something like that. And it's in an ideal location if you were to be a visitor to Cardiff. It's very close to the attractions in Cardiff Bay and the waterfront itself, and it's also within easy walking distance of the city centre.
It's sort of up-and-coming area of Cardiff. Previously, it was known as Tiger Bay. It was Cardiff's melting pot, really, of all different sort of cultures and people from all over the world coming to live there.
Cardiff is the capital of Wales, situated in the southeast of Wales, a fairly large city, population of just under 400,000. The crime rate in Cardiff would be fairly comparative with similar cities of similar sizes. It'll have its own issues, but nothing particularly unusual.
You kind of get sort of petty crime like burglaries, like thefts, every now and again, sort of assaults for a murder to happen. That was quite out of the ordinary, really.
Cardiff is home to 28-year-old student Nadine Aburris.
She was a local girl from Cardiff Bay, was very sort of close to her family, her mother and her siblings.
Nadine was talented, she was slim, she was petite, she was the centre of a very devout Muslim family. She was a sister to 6 brothers and sisters. She was aunt to 9 nieces and nephews. Her mother, Andrew, described her as the glue of the family. Sadly, one gaping hole in her life was the fact that she hadn't, unlike many of her brothers and sisters, met the right person.
Nadine had previously been in a relationship with a Muslim man. Unfortunately, that relationship hadn't worked out, and they had separated and divorced, and Nadine was looking to find a companionship and a partner. One of the areas that Nadine looked to find a partner was using an online dating site. The dating site focused its services for people of a Muslim faith.
Over about the last 10-15 years, the internet is used by everybody. There's a new expression actually at the moment called social internet usage. If you look at how you and I and other people will now use the internet, as you get older, it tends to be far more about family matters and business matters. But when you're young, the internet is going to be used for social internet usage, which means it's going to be about social media. It's going to be now about apps. It's going to be about contacting people. As we now know, you've got over 50% of most relationships now begin in the online world. A lot of that is to do with ease of connectivity and communication, but also there's a feeling or belief that there's a safety to it, which unfortunately it's not always going to be that safe. I get asked many occasions, has the internet created, if you like, sexual predators? The answer to that is quite easy. Well, no, it hasn't. But what it does, it facilitates. If you go back over time, most relationships began, in my day, you'd go to a bar, you'd go to a restaurant, but you'd go with company, you'd go with your friends, your mates. And what would happen then? You might see somebody and there was always that extra element of safety because of numbers. That's not where we are with the internet, especially when it comes to social dating or dating sites or dating apps. You might feel safe because of where you're accessing the app, but of course you are alone. And if there's any sort of vulnerability, there's always going to be the possibility of being online to somebody who's going to lie and be an online predator.
On New Year's Eve 2014, a shocking discovery is made at the Future Inn Hotel.
A duty cleaner initially went into the room 203 at the Future Inns in Cardiff Bay, despite the fact there was a do not disturb sign on the door, and went in and discovered a woman looking very, very peaceful, tucked up in bed, the covers drawn up to her neck.
There was a suicide note that had been scribbled on a handwritten piece of paper next to her.
Then a call is then within minutes made to South Wales Police notifying them that a body has been discovered.
Police officers rush to the scene.
While there was a fairly large police presence and they were having to kind of be fairly discreet, it wasn't a case where a large area of Cardiff Bay or whatever was cordoned off, because that simply isn't something that can happen. The hotel has got guests, it's got bookings and things like that. The police needed to do their work, and that was obviously prioritised by all. But the scene itself, you know, as somebody that you could walk past it and you'd see there was police activity, but unless you either knew the circumstances or unless you were within the building, you probably wouldn't have had quite a sense of the gravity of it, because obviously the crime itself was effectively contained within room 203.
We found out that the person who was found dead in the hotel was Nadine Aburas. Nadine was 28 years old. She was a local girl from Cardiff Bay, was very sort of close to her family, her mother and her siblings. She was very sort of a happy woman. She was a student and studying.
Nadine was talented, she was slim, she was petite, she was the centre of a very devout Muslim family.
She was just an ordinary girl, really, and no one could have known this sort of thing would have happened to her.
As detectives comb through room 203, the scene tells a story far more sinister than it first appears.
Police have attended the scene. They're suspicious, they're checking everything out.
Her body had been washed, somewhat bizarrely, and placed in a duvet, in a pose with her hands across her chest, and with a suicide note stating, "I'm sorry it's ended, I still love you."
But something doesn't look quite right to them. This apparent suicide note doesn't feel quite right. The circumstances don't look right.
Upon closer inspection of Nadine's body, it became clear that this was not a suicide, but rather a murder.
Investigations established that she had been strangled.
Had just been left in the hotel room. At the first stages, they didn't know who was responsible for this, and they were obviously still at large at that point.
The hunt for the killer has begun, but who exactly are police searching for? Cardiff, New Year's Eve 2014. 28-year-old Nadine Aburas is found dead in room 203 at the Future Inn Hotel. She is tucked up in bed with an apparent suicide note next to her, but police quickly realise the young woman did not take her own life. She has been strangled. The investigation is now underway.
The first time that I became aware of this, as with most of the media, was very early in 2015. It became clear that there had been a crime at the Future Inns Hotel in Cardiff Bay, and it became clear that this was a murder. So initially that was all the kind of drip of information that begins to come out, particularly with it being New Year's Day that this was discovered. But it very quickly snowballed into a much higher profile case that went on for a protracted period of time, but with a large media involvement as well.
The circumstances of the case inevitably meant that there was some significant coverage in the local media and national media as well about this incident.
It became very quickly clear that this was a very serious and quite unusual case, really, in that Nadine Aburas, very sadly, was named as the victim that had died. She actually lived within sight, certainly within a few hundred metres of the hotel where she ultimately met her death.
Speaking with hotel staff, police learned that Nadine arrived at the hotel accompanied by a man the night before her body was found.
She'd been there with her former partner, Sami Al-Mari from New York.
In 2012, Nadine started to talk online with an individual called Sami Al-Mari. That relationship continued very much online with chats for over a year.
He had a flat in Brooklyn. He was, like many New Yorkers, brash, self-confident, not unhappy in a confrontation. But these were qualities that Nadine admired. With a vast Atlantic Ocean between them, it started by online, then Skyping, as was popular in those days, and text and phone calls and emails.
During the online conversations, Al-Mari was very supportive of Nadine's studies, very charming, keen to impress, and portrayed himself as the perfect gentleman. During 2013, Al-Mari made a number of visits to Cardiff to see Nadine, and during each of those visits, he would shower her with gifts, be the perfect gentleman, discuss their plans for the future and how supportive he was going to be. He was keen to be supportive in relation to her studies and really extended the persona that he portrayed online in terms of perfect gentleman and wanting to be there for her.
Things were getting serious between them. At the time, when she first met him, he seemed very bright, open, and fun to be with.
Nadine arrived at the hotel shortly after 9 p.m, where she met Al-Mari. Together, they went up to room 203, and CCTV from the hotel shows them both entering the hotel room. That same CCTV shows that shortly after midnight, Al-Mari leaves that hotel room alone. Nadine's nowhere to be seen.
Al-Mari was seen attending the Grosvenor Casino nearby. It was there he asked if he could take out £10,000 in cash, took a number of shots of tequila, and asked a member of staff if he could fill a water bottle up with tequila. That was refused. Throughout the night and into the early hours of the morning, Al-Mari was extremely intoxicated, having taken numerous amounts of tequila shots, and he was visibly drunk when he was seen by members of staff at the hotel and the members of the public. Yeah, he was just in a complete state. From there, he returned to the hotel. He spoke to a member of staff who opened up the bar for him, and he took 2 bottles of lager to his room. A matter of hours later, he left the hotel room for the last time, got into Nadine's car, and made his way to the M4. After initially driving in the wrong direction towards West Wales, he then turned round and then drove towards Heathrow before getting on the plane out of the country.
In a chilling turn, hotel staff receive a sinister phone call from Al-Mari.
Sami Al-Mari actually phones the Future Inns hotel and he says, "I'm concerned about my friend in room 203. Could you check on her?" But obviously by this stage, the horrible truth is known that Nadine Aburas is no longer alive.
Hello, speaking.
There's a woman dead in the room 203.
There's a body in the room. Okay, can you tell me more about that?
The girl's 28 years old. Is a Muslim girl. We was together there in hotel, and she killed herself.
The conversation that he has becomes very, very unusual. It goes from one police officer, it's then passed on to a negotiator. They can hear very chillingly another woman in the background, and he then says, "I'm going to do to her what I did to Nadine." They form the opinion that perhaps he's under the influence of alcohol or something else, because he doesn't seem at all stable. It seems completely irrational, going from being concerned about Nadine to being quite terrifying in some of the things that he's saying.
Having identified Al-Mari as a suspect, the investigating team's attention turned to locating him.
He was still at large. This was gone from just a small investigation contained to Wales, but had now gone international.
With the victim identified as Nadine Aburas, police break the news of her death to her family.
Specialist officers would have been sent round to speak to her family, and that would be a devastating message to give, and an even more devastating message to receive for the family. One can only imagine how distraught they must have been.
During the investigation, police try to learn more about Nadine and her turbulent relationship with Sami Al-Mahri and the events that led up to the murder.
She met somebody that she seemed initially, in terms of messages, to click with. There was a spark between the two of them, and there was lots of communication, and it was said that he became besotted, basically, with Nadine. He would shower her with gifts. He gave her money for things like a laptop and a car. So he was very, very outwardly, very, very generous towards her, and that was the kind of genesis of their relationship.
But this was to hide a darker side which emerged only later, but at the time things seemed to be carrying on very well. It was only in 2014 that Nadine's friends could see a marked shift, and Nadine was clearly now a very worried woman.
She went to New York herself in 2014. Sami Al-Mahri really was a fantasist, or it certainly was a liar. He projected this image that he was a very, very wealthy tycoon of some description. When she went to his apartment in Brooklyn, while he did have some kind of business, it in no way matched exactly what he had claimed, the wealth that he claimed to have, the lifestyle that he claimed to have.
Despite indicating to Nadine that he was a successful, rich business person, actually Al-Mahri drove a limousine for a living, probably came into contact with wealthy people. It's possible that Al-Mahri saw the lifestyles of the people that he was working for and was jealous. He might have desired to live like that, and he created his own account and his own world of living like that, which he sold to Nadine.
He wasn't this kind of lavish, big living man, but, you know, there's no suggestion that Nadine was kind of in it for the money. She seemed to like him for who he was. They'd met, they'd struck up a relationship, but he clearly hadn't been honest with her from the start. And this was where things really, really turned sour. She shared images with her family that showed her with a black eye, a split lip. He'd clearly been violent towards her. When she returned, having said to Sami Al-Mahri that their relationship was over, she also made a report to police saying that she had been raped by Sami Al-Mahri and that he had attempted to strangle her. However, that wasn't proceeded with.
This was a very traumatic experience for her, what she had been through in her relationship with Al-Mahri.
Nadine would try to distance herself from Al-Mahri, but he had a disturbing plan to try to keep her close.
She confided to some friends that not only had she been raped, but that she was now desperately worried about a potential blackmail plot that Alami was cooking up for her. Alami had threatened if she was ever to leave him, and he would send topless pictures of her to her family.
He had taken pictures of Nadine while she was in the shower when she was visiting him, and he very, very cruelly said, "I'm going to post these to Facebook. I'm going to shame you in front of your family by sharing these images."
Now, this was a serious issue for a devout Muslim family that Nadine was at the centre of. There's no question that this would be utter humiliation, and which she would never live down. It would be the end of her life in the family. It was that serious. I'm convinced that upmost in her mind was that she had to get the pictures back. The least people who knew about this, the better. This was an issue that Nadine had to get to the bottom of and end herself. And Nadine wanted to finish, complete with Al-Mahri, and get him out of her life. But she could only do it on her terms, and her terms had to be to see those pictures destroyed or back in her own possession. There was no question just walking out. If she was going to walk out, she had to walk out with those pictures. This was a secret that she really kept to herself.
She had done absolutely nothing wrong. There was nothing she could have done to have prevented that happening, but it exercises sheer terror over her, and it enables Sami Al-Mahri to remain in this position of complete control over her, whether he is 5,000 miles away or on her doorstep. He is effectively in her pocket all the time because he's contacting her even when she's blocking him on messaging services like Viber and WhatsApp. He's still able to see what she's doing, and he's able to call her. It's incessant.
Despite the threat of blackmail Sami gave to Nadine if she'd leave him, she began dating another man, but Al-Mahri soon finds out.
Al-Mahri had given a gift of a mobile phone to Nadine back in 2012, 2013. Now, everybody likes a new phone. Thank you very much. Very nice indeed. But Al-Mahri had used the phone, interrogated the phone, so knew the details and the information on it, so that he was then able to create an app on his own phone which had access to texts that were going into Nadine's phone. So there he was in Brooklyn, able to keep a minute-by-minute monitoring of her life in Cardiff.
He can switch on the camera, he can switch on the microphone, he can listen to all the telephone calls. Spyware is very, very easy to put on someone's device. And if it's an app, you can hide that in another app, so you won't even see it as an icon.
He was able to spy on Nadine across the Atlantic, 3,000 miles away. Today, that sounds almost like a James Bond thing. 10 years ago, in 2012, 2013, this is an astonishing feat of IT espionage. But it meant that Almari knew everything, virtually, that Nadine was up to, and he very quickly cottoned on that there was a new man in her life.
She became aware of this because he was saying things in the messages that can only have been by listening in. So he's put that on, but that's just that element of control. At that stage, he thought he was losing or had lost her. So how do you get her back? Well, in fact, you're not going to, but he didn't want that. He didn't want her out of his life, so therefore he needed to control it. Now, when he put them on, though, that was before the New York trip because he bought the gifts. So he's now planned this. So the control goes all the way back. It doesn't just start when she was in New York. The control began when he actually had his 3 visits to Cardiff.
Almari was determined to stop this, to stop another man getting hold of what he considered to be his possession.
Cardiff, 2014. 28-year-old Nadine Aburas is being stalked and threatened by her ex-partner, Sami Almari, who has discovered she is dating another man through spyware he installed on her phone. Fearing for her safety, Nadine confides in her family about Almari's threatening messages.
But she doesn't know what to do because he's now in contact about the pictures, about what I'm going to do. She realises spyware is involved on the phone and because he knows everything about her. So you've got all this. She doesn't know what to do. How do I end this? How do I stop this?
He flew to the UK shortly after Christmas, travelled from Heathrow up to Cardiff and ensconced himself in the Fortune Inn, which is a hotel in Cardiff Bay, very close to Nadine's own flat. By this time, Nadine's brother knew that Almari, A, was in Wales, and B, he was a wrong one, and he had to get him out of his sister's life. So he actually picked him up for a chat and then drove him to Cardiff Central Station and said, right, get on a train, back to London, flight out of here, go to the States and keep away from my sister. Almari had other ideas. He did completely the opposite. As he admits, he left the brother at the station, turned away from the platform, bought a bottle of gin and headed straight back to the hotel. Almari arranged to meet Nadine for dinner, no doubt under the cloak of have peace talks. Nadine had to take him up on that offer if she had any hope of getting the pictures back.
Nadine had dinner with Almari before the murder occurred. She probably felt safe amongst other people and not at risk, but unfortunately she went back to the hotel with him, which provided an opportunity for him to be alone with her.
And on that evening, on New Year's Eve, the CCTV caught her at 11:15 that night, and these are the last known sightings of Nadine before she was found strangled. How a strangled woman would commit suicide, perhaps only Almari knows.
Following Nadine's murder, Cardiff police launch an international manhunt to track down their prime suspect, Sami Almari.
Sami Almari is on the run for several weeks, and during that period there are several very sickening and distressing things that form a part of that.
A particular disturbing feature of the manhunt phase is that whilst he was on the run, Almari was actually contacting Nadine's family members, taunting them.
He messages her mother. He tells her that he loved Nadine and that she should let it go and things like that. He even begins posting on her Facebook account. And because he's taken her laptop and phone with her, so this is understandably hugely distressing for everyone involved. And that forms part of the background to why police are so keen to detain him.
And then he even extended that to the investigating officers and was known to be laughing at them down the phone at their attempts to trace him. He was giving false locations as to where he was in the world and clearly enjoying the opportunity to just taunt the investigation team.
Well, Sammy, is that you? You miss me? Where are you now, Sammy? What's funny, Sammy? Why are you laughing?
I'm so far because I'm busy. I'm in Cuba, Havana.
Is that the truth, that you're in Havana?
Told them that he had gone to Thailand, to Havana in Cuba, and also claimed he'd been in Puerto Rico. He also told police he was with girls in various hotel rooms, and he told them that he was going to do to them what he had done to Nadine.
Now, even though we watch these programs about how no one can disappear, you can disappear for an element of time. And you can go to a country where there's no extradition order. So if you're thinking like that, you can go and you can get somewhere. So Cuba would be in a classic, but he has stayed, shall we say, contactable in that sense. Very odd behaviour.
The evidence in this case indicates that Almari had some interesting personality features which may have led to his ongoing contact and reportedly goading the police as they were searching for him. Not only that, his behaviour within the offence suggests some strong personality features that might have driven his behaviour, so his control of Nadine, his eventual brutal murder of Nadine, and trying to cover that up. The evidence after the offence and what he did and his travels and so on, it seems that he was seeking perhaps excitement and had some unmet needs, and he was callous enough to goad the police, and that affects her family and the wider victims in this case, suggesting that he had some antisocial personality traits. It seems to feel like he thought he was above the law. So did he think that he wasn't going to get caught? Did he think that the law doesn't apply to him? He was risking his freedom by continuing this contact and not simply hiding and fleeing from the police. So what was that driven by? It could have been excitement, but it could have been that he was so preoccupied with Nadine that that ongoing thought about her and his ongoing involvement fulfilled some sort of need for that preoccupation.
Investigators work on tracking Almari's movements after fleeing the UK.
He's not a billionaire that he can rely on all these funds that he's stashed around the world. So wherever he's going, he's on the run, and he's going to be doing things. And if you've got no money, you're going to show out. You're probably going to have to start beg, borrow, or steal. So he's not in a good position. So you look at the individual, and he hasn't really got a hope in hell, because yes, it's all well and good wanting to go on the run, but that costs a lot of money. For the police, it wasn't difficult. They were able to track with the ANPR and find out exactly who this person was. You've got a witness in the hotel, you've got that American accent. They know who they're looking for at this stage.
What they quickly established was that after the murder, he had taken Nadine's car and driven it to Heathrow Airport,
where he's able very quickly to get on a flight to Doha in Qatar. And he can then connect from there onto Tanzania, where he knows that he's got family and where presumably he thinks he's going to be able to be concealed and potentially get away with this horrific crime.
Members of the police force in South Wales travelled out to Tanzania to search for Almari. Now, this is pretty much unheard of. Strange thing to happen, really, for officers to be sent out to Tanzania from South Wales.
Welsh police have intel that Almari is hiding somewhere in Tanzania, a densely populated region of East Africa, but he manages to evade capture.
Officers from South Wales returned home without being able to find Almari.
January 19th, 2015, the day after detectives return to Wales empty-handed, they get a surprising phone call from Tanzanian police.
Almari was found by members of the law force in Tanzania.
Sami Almari is located in a place called Iringa in Tanzania, where he did have some family and where he'd been managing to hide out. But then it's a couple more months before he's actually able to be extradited back. You know, extradition isn't a simple, quick process, and it's not as fast as South Wales Police being able to say, great, we've got our man, put him on the next flight back. There's lots of paperwork and whatever to go around it. So it's around March before they actually are able to fly him back into the UK. And it's very, very interesting that hearing from police officers at that time, they say when he was being brought back that he was effusive, confident, chatty almost, some kind of denial of what he was about to go through, or some kind of arrogant belief that he was somehow going to be bought out, bailed out in some way or another.
So following Al-Mahri's arrest, he was obviously interviewed by police and then charged with Nadine's murder.
And it's likely then that the reality and the seriousness of his own situation, facing life in prison potentially, hit him.
And it's only when he's booked into custody and he becomes a different person and realises that the game is kind of up for him.
Prosecutors prepared to take Sami Al-Mahri to trial for the murder of 28-year-old student Nadine Aburas. Will justice be served? January 12th, 2016. 44-year-old Sami Al-Mahri faces trial for the murder of 28-year-old Nadine Aburas, whose body was discovered in the Future Inn Hotel in Cardiff on New Year's Eve in 2014. Al-Mahri strangled his ex-girlfriend before staging her death to look like a suicide.
After many months and some examinations by psychiatrists, Al-Mahri arrived at Cardiff Crown Court in 2016 for his trial and pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. And he was going to produce some psychiatric evidence that said he was not responsible for his actions.
He claimed that he'd been hearing voices and that God had told him to kill Nadine. He had also made up lies to Nadine's family and to the police, claiming that Nadine had wanted him to help her kill herself. The first day of Al-Mahri's trial at Cardiff Crown Court, obviously it was a packed courtroom. There's a lot of members of the press like myself there to report on the case. Obviously there was the barristers, the judge, members of the jury. Al-Mahri came into the courtroom, was in the dock behind glass. He sort of struck me as a very sort of far away, like there wasn't sort of anything behind his eyes. Just sort of, he wasn't taking anything in about what was being said in court. He just seemed to be wearing ordinary clothes, had shaved hair, and yeah, just didn't seem present. Having previously portrayed himself as this successful businessman and a financially high-end person, he seemed anything but. He just seemed like an ordinary person and someone who was, in fact, not very impressive looking at all. Nadine Aburas, her mother was there as well as the siblings, and they pretty much took up a lot of the public gallery. And yeah, you could tell, hearing the horrific details about their daughter from the opening of the case, it must have been awful for them. In the opening of the case, prosecutors said that Al-Mahri had murdered Nadine, that he had killed her in the Future Inn Hotel after a years-long relationship taking place online and then having met up in person. They referred to where he had threatened to kill her and threatened physical violence against her, and obviously had threatened to blackmail her with the sexual images of her. In those texts, he came across as a very jealous and controlling person. When she had been in contact with other people on her phone, he seemed to know about it. He seemed to have access to her phone through some kind of device, and again, he was very, very physically threatening towards her and basically acted like she was his possession, and it was up to him what she could and couldn't do.
They claimed that Al-Mahri was a man so obsessed, so besotted with Nadine, that if he couldn't have her, then no one else would. That he was a man who was intent to come to Britain, and that in the end, he was prepared to kill.
The forged suicide note is examined by the prosecution.
You've then got the crudely written suicide note, very much in air quotes, that's evidently been authored by Sami Al-Mahri, but that again has these key lacunae in it, the dates, the grammar, that aren't correct and that aren't consistent with how Nadine would have written. You've then got the fact that he has fled, which clearly shows some kind of bad faith. Had he stuck around, called the police and tried to get some kind of help for Nadine, then perhaps he might have had some chance of running a defence saying that it was something that had happened in the moment or a diminished responsibility, but that all falls away. So they've got that, and then they've also had the time and the resources to use lots and lots of data analysis, because they've obviously been able to track down his phone, which had been left in Cardiff, and they can see this kind of constant stream of messages from him to her, and Nadine's family would have found all of them utterly terrifying, but there was one that said, "I will never stop, I will harm you." This is somebody that had engaged in a prolonged course of action, and somebody that simply wasn't going to be deterred, however strong the case against him from Nadine and from her family was to say, this has to stop, this is over. He was somebody that was not going to take no for an answer, and the data on his phone was able to really back that up. It was able to show that he had this kind of minute by minute obsession, infatuation with Nadine Burris, with controlling her, that was the lead up to this truly awful crime.
The defence was that this was not a premeditated crime, that it was the result of a drunken outburst. The psychiatric evidence was that in the past, Al-Murray had a history of mental illness, particularly wrapped in alcoholism. In 2009, he had attempted to throw himself off the Brooklyn Bridge, and he'd been placed on an alcohol program. He was also shown to have a very low tolerance of frustration. Now, we all get very frustrated at times, but that should not lead us, as it did Al-Murray, to aggression, violence, and a capacity to kill. He was said to have a dissociated personality disorder, which is at the lower end, in terms of the criminal law, of mental illness, and certainly goes nowhere near reaching the threshold of being a man who is not responsible for his actions.
This then becomes a thing that he then heard the voice of God, that the voice of God was telling him that Nadine wanted to die, or that she should die. She clearly didn't want to die. She had a loving family behind her that she loved very much, and they loved her very much. She had lots to live for in her life. She absolutely didn't want to die, but Sami Al-Murray tried to maintain this fiction. He had somehow helped her end her own life because that was what she wanted.
The trial was due to last 4 weeks, so we were expecting 4 weeks of hearing evidence about this horrific case. But upon going to the court the second day, Al-Murray pleaded guilty to murder.
Once he saw the scale of the evidence against him and the strength of the evidence against him, he probably, as a kind of calculating man, took a calculating way out that actually all I'm going to do here is be on the end of a guilty verdict, and I'm going to spend longer behind bars. So in the end, he took the way out of saying, hold up, I'm guilty.
Whether he thought the case against him was too strong, or whether he just wanted to rub sort of Nadine's family's nose in the dirt by having the horrific facts against him played out in court, we'll never truly know, but it was almost as if he wanted the sort of stage and wanted to have that moment in court where his horrific crimes was told to the nation.
Sami Al-Murray is a cruel, vindictive, calculating individual that is purely out for himself, and that only ever looked out for himself throughout this whole awful, illegal episode.
Having pleaded guilty to murder, Al-Murray was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a recommendation that he must serve a minimum of 17 years before he can even be considered for parole.
Perhaps he can be considered lucky to receive such a sentence. In the judge's view, she found there was no direct evidence that this was premeditated. She said this was a result of drink and envy, and this was not something he had planned. Suspicion of planning is not actual evidence of planning.
Nadine Burris's family, from things that they said afterwards, would have happily seen the full trial through, because they wanted it very much public what Sami Al-Murray had done, what he had put her through, because the scale of what he had put her through was not confined to what happened in room 203 in that hotel. It was something much more insidious, much more long-lasting, and ultimately entirely terrifying, not some kind of momentary crime.
A minimum recommendation of 17 years is on the low side for this type of offence. No doubt it will have been influenced by Almari's guilty plea, albeit a late guilty plea. The fact is that there's no sentence that would bring justice to the family. They lived their life sentence without the daughter and sister. And so it's a long time, but it'll never be long enough.
I think there is some consolation in seeing a murderer convicted, being put behind bars. There is very little consolation in repairing the wounds, but what can be done was done in this case.
Personally speaking, this was the case that sort of stuck with me. Also, I've covered a number of murders across my sort of career, but I think the sort of cold and callous nature that Almari carried out this murder, the fact it was done in a hotel, the fact he'd gone on the run and sort of fled the country again, that was something I've never come across before in the cases I've covered.
Nadine's murder is a sobering reminder of the dangers of modern dating through websites and social media.
Meeting somebody in the online world is not dangerous per se. However, once you then go into the real world, then suddenly there is that different element. Nadine, you could say, was unfortunate, but of course she is a victim of an online predator who was using dating apps and direct messaging because he was looking for a victim to be able to control, groom, and exploit. The thing the internet does, it gives you the connectivity to the world. It gives you the connectivity to individuals that you would not normally have. The internet has facilitated his own persona as a predator, and that's the danger the internet does pose. And unfortunately, in this case, that was to do with physical and sexual exploitation resulting in murder.
This case highlights the well-known risks associated with online dating. For many, it's a perfectly enjoyable and acceptable experience, but I would urge that anybody who's going to meet someone in person that they've only met online before takes sensible safety precautions, perhaps make sure friends and family know where they're going, have a kind of agreed time of contact, and just take care about their own safety. And if anyone has a family member that's in that kind of situation, then they should seek help.
I remember Nadine's mother, Andrea, speaking very movingly about this gaping hole in their lives. Nadine could never be replaced, that she had been the glue that kept the family together. Her brothers described her as a ray of sunshine, which I thought was a fitting tribute to this bright, talented, independent-minded girl.
We often look back in cases like this and think, could something have stopped what happened? What was missed? Now, importantly, Nadine did report an alleged rape and assault to the police, and it seems that that prosecution didn't go through, maybe because of the international element, but that's not clear. So there were points at which it was clear that there was some risk posed by Almari, but ultimately in these cases it's easy to look back and say, why didn't something happen here? Look what we missed. And importantly, we need to focus on identifying that in the future. What we need to remember is Nadine. Nadine was a young woman. Like any other young woman, she was interested in finding a partner, and that ultimately put her at risk. This could happen to anybody, and remembering Nadine will help us remember that.